Maybe I'll actually get the date right for the first time in 13 years. It's the 4th of November, 2010. Time flies when you're having fun and when you get old. So for me, time really goes by very fast. It's a rainy day on a Thursday afternoon, and I feel like I'm home every time I walk in the door of the Clinton County Historian's office, because yes, I love history too. And I've spent quite a bit of time at this old, worn table. Anastasia Pratt, how are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
We asked her before we began would she prefer Anastasia or Stacy, and she said, but I love the name Anastasia.
Thank you.
The late Addie Shields. I can't spend a lot of time talking about her because I'll cry. No, actually, we spent so much time with her, and she was such a dear, wonderful woman in so many ways and meant a lot to this office.
Yes.
And so when you came in here, you had size 84 shoes, and you have worn them well. How long have you been here?
I've been here now for 2.5 years.
Is that possible?
Yeah.
Seems like last Tuesday. We'll hear from the Peanut Gallery, which is occupied by Gloria, your mommy,
Yes.
and Bob Cheeseman over here on the side here,
Yes.
saying hello. So we've got history packed in this room today.
We do.
We can feel those spirits vibrating in the walls. I told Calvin, maybe Addie will be with us today, and the microphone will fall on the floor, or something will happen if we dare to make a mistake.
Yes.
So we've talked to your mom, but we've never actually interviewed you. And as I was driving here today, I said to myself, it's about time. But we've got a good topic to talk about today. And before we do any of that, I want to get a little bit about your background. I know
Okay.
you were weaned on history,
Yes.
but as a child, always interested in area history, genealogy.
Well, area history, yes. I was very fortunate. I went to school in Peru, and I had wonderful teachers who really brought history into our classrooms. Local, national, state, international. History was a living part of life at Peru, and I'm grateful to have been the beneficiary of that. And then I went to Plattsburgh State, where I studied history with another bunch of wonderful faculty members. And then I was even more fortunate to go off to the University of Michigan, where I changed focus a little bit and studied American culture, but I always have had the history.
It all fits,
in
though.
that.
It all fits.
It all connects. And then the genealogy is sort of a sideline that really is more my mom's interest than mine. But certainly for the last, 25 years or so, I've been able to witness that exploration as an observer, sometimes driver, sometimes typist, but more an observer of my mom's good work.
You know, genealogy is so much a part of historical associations and
Yes.
historical offices these days, more so than I ever dreamed before. And I remember historians from 60 years ago whose main job was to clip something out of the newspaper every day and keep a file.
Yes.
And there were lots of those around here, too.
Well, and there still are. And actually, some of those previous generations of historians did some interesting things. One of my favorite, in sort of the quirky historian way, is that Dr. Kellogg, David Kellogg, the local physician, we have actual scrapbooks of clippings he took from genealogical records that are just clipping after clipping after clipping of a genealogy listings that we have now that people can look back through. But it kind of combines
Those
two.
clippings are about 110 years old, right?
Yes. Yeah, they're very old. And
Isn't that amazing?
And I'm not quite sure where he got them. They weren't in a local paper, so not all of the names are local. In fact, most of them probably aren't. But he found them fascinating enough to clip them and paste them into scrapbooks. And
He's one of those people whom I would love to have met and sat down at a table like this and talked to, because he was into everything.
it seems it.
He's the one that stood on the hill and looked down on what was the site of Pike's Cantonment and described it. And the search for Pike's Cantonment baffled people for so many years
Yes.
until Keith Herkelo finally discovered the actual location. And I had false hopes so many times during my radio career, people coming to me and saying, here it is, here it
Right.
was. So I'm running with a metal detector over my shoulder and going there. Anastasia is very humble, but you had a pretty distinguished career starting in high school. Who inspired you to be such a wonderful student in those days? I mean, we're talking party time when you're 16, 17 years old. You just
Well-
decided to knuckle down?
You know, I think that it's just the way I was born. I'd say it's something special that I chose, but a lot of it's just who I am. And the other part comes from my family, where, a strong work ethic is encouraged and always was encouraged. And I did have also the model of a couple of great aunts, especially, who had been able to work their way through school, pay their way through high school and college in a time when women didn't do that. And I also had the benefit of hearing stories of other family members who didn't have that opportunity, who weren't able to work their way to high school because of economic conditions. And I suppose that all of those things combined made me appreciate those chances.
It's hard to have that mature perspective when you're 16, 17 years old.
It's true.
So you're a rare gem,
Oh, well, thank you.
and it paid off.
It did.
So in retrospect, it was worth it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I feel like I didn't miss anything in those years anyway. I had wonderful friends and I had a good time. It's just that oftentimes what's a good time for me, and was a good time when I was 16, might not have been what the party crowd would have considered a good time.
Now, did you get a master's degree in history?
No, I have a bachelor's degree in history,
The bachelor's
and then
degree in history?
and the other 2 degrees are in American culture.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it was a good package for you.
Oh, absolutely.
And how did you graduate into this job after we lost Addie?
Well,
Did you envision this a long time ago?
no. As with everybody in Clinton County, I'm not quite sure I ever envisioned a historian's office that wasn't occupied by Addie. I mean, she just was the historian, and that legacy certainly has continued. Every event I go to, people remember Addie fondly and remember things that she said or did or times they had here. But what happened, honestly, is that one day we were looking in the newspaper and we knew that Addie had officially retired, and knew that but didn't really think much about what was happening. But I opened the newspaper and there was the listing for the job, and I thought,
Aha!
I hadn't really thought about this before, but maybe I should apply. And so that's really how it happened.
But before that, did you think, well, maybe I got to go to Cleveland or back to
No,
Michigan or somewhere?
no, I wanted to be here. I loved Michigan. While I was at Michigan, I had the chance to live in France for a year, and I loved that.
Here we go. Here we go. Did
But
you really?
I did, and
Wow.
it was wonderful. They both were wonderful, but I wanted to come home. I always knew that I wanted to be here because I love this landscape. I love this place. I love being surrounded by mountains. I love being near the lake. I love the apple orchards. I love everything about this place, and so
Sign her up. Sign her up. Calvin and I have spent all these years talking about why we stay here.
yeah. Well, there's a whole huge, wonderful list of reasons to stay here. And so, although I loved Michigan and loved the chance to be at a big school with libraries that were open 24 hours a day,
True.
I knew the whole time I was there that that was not where I wanted to be. And so when I got the chance to come home, I did. And then I was so very fortunate to, find a job teaching at a college locally, and to find this job, and to sort of find my place where the world makes sense and all is well.
And since Addie spent so many years defining the word historian
Yes.
in Beekman Town, in this office, and anywhere she stood or sat, even to the point where she was well into her 90s, what do you envision is the role of the Clinton County historian in this office? Tell us.
Yeah, well, I think that it's a changing role based on time, but also based on whatever need is coming up at the moment. But one of my jobs, I firmly believe, is to be an archivist, to maintain records so that people can do research of all types, and so that there's a historic record left for future generations. So that's one of my jobs, and I do take that job seriously, even campaigning actively for people to bring photographs and records in so that we continue the march of history forward into the future. Another job that I have is, I think, educational. I'm meant to teach our young people about history. I'm meant to also learn from people history, but to take everything that I learn and hopefully pass it on in a meaningful way to others. And I also think that in some ways, my job is to make a little bit of history when it makes sense. And so some of the projects that I've undertaken are designed to do that. The mosaic in the front of the government building is an example. It was educational. I went and worked with school kids all across the county, which was wonderful.
What an incredible thing.
Oh, it was
When
great.
we stood there and filmed it, Calvin and I were in awe, to the point where when people come to visit me, I say, get in the car. I want to show you something about what our school kids have done.
Yeah.
Isn't it amazing?
It's wonderful. And those kids, they were just phenomenal. I literally got to spend time with every kid who worked on the project.
I love it.
Oh, it was wonderful. It was really, truly wonderful. All of these teachers who invited me into their classrooms and let me take over and talk for 40 minutes or an hour, or in some cases an entire day, who did the research with their students and who let their students sort of have the freedom to take that research and turn it into something very visual and very real. And then the artists who went in and worked with those same students and teachers to create something that's lasting. We have this beautiful 38-foot by 9-foot ceramic tile mosaic that really offers a timeline of our history from the earliest days until the 1880s, and does it beautifully, with images that are recognizable, with ideas that are concrete and that will carry us into the future, and with a sense of the real people who live here, which I think is my other job, to make sure that we remember everybody who's part of creating history, and not just the few big names who make a splash in every generation.
Sadly, that mosaic is known to many people, but not to a lot of people. And I dare say that quite a few of our viewers may never have visited the Clinton County Government Center for one reason or another, but we would urge them to do so, because that mosaic is unique.
It is.
And wonderful.
It is, I agree. And certainly there are lots of places to see pictures. The county website certainly features it, but it's so much better in person to see tiles and to know, as you're looking at the tiles, that a 7th grade student from somewhere in Clinton County did this. It's a great experience to see.
So what you've made perfectly clear to me, and I hope to our viewers, is that there is something for everyone in this office.
I think so, yes.
And if we do nothing else in the course of this program, we hope to inspire young people to pay attention to history. It's hard to do when you're 10 or 12.
Yes.
It starts with your parents, and you were inspired by models, your own parents and models and relatives, and teachers had such a huge impact on my life by pointing the way and telling me what to read and how to comprehend it.
Yes.
And so that's, you've accepted that challenge. You've got the cloak,
Yes.
even though it might be invisible. And so far as I can tell, you're wearing it well. I know you've enjoyed your 2.5 years here.
I have. It's a good place to be.
Now it would be nice if you had a budget of $3.7 million a year.
Yes, things would be different with that, wouldn't
Because
they?
I remember when there was one old Royal typewriter in here and a bunch of filing cases, you know what I mean?
Yes.
Now it's a little different because you talked of yourself as an archivist, and you can archive things in many ways, especially electronically now,
Yes.
and that's nice.
Yes, and we're working on that. Usually on Thursday afternoons, I'm standing up in the other room with my scanner and computer on top of the map cabinet, scanning documents and photographs with the thought that eventually all of those scanned items will be available on the internet for anybody who wants to study Clinton County's history, and will also be available on a computer in the office for people who come in. So I certainly have that challenge of bringing our records into the 21st century, but also of maintaining the records that are old. And so the other part of my job is certainly to maintain those records, which are wonderfully varied in themselves. We have laws of New York State, books printed in the late 1700s, but we also have the actual enlistment rosters from the Civil War.
Isn't that neat? Oh,
Yeah,
that is
young
so
men throughout
cool.
Clinton County literally
Oh.
signed their name.
Oh,
I love them. They're wonderful.
oh yes.
So my job is, I'm fortunate in my job in that I get to bounce back and forth between those worlds of the very old and often very fragile to the much newer ways to catalog and maintain history.
Everybody I know is not thrilled with their job.
Yes.
People get trapped in certain jobs, whether they're menial or important for somebody else. So they work 30 years and they retire and they don't know what to do when they finish. But you really relish what you do. And
I do.
isn't that nice all by itself?
It is. I'm wonderfully lucky. I joke sometimes with my family that I go to work and I alternate days between college and historian's office. And I know which day it is. I know if it's a historian's office day or if it's a college day.
That's better than I do most days. What is
But
it,
I don't know much
Tuesday or-
else.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily know that. I know it's the day I'm at the historian's office, but it's because every day, all day, I get to do things that I think are important, that I think are helpful to the world at large, and that I just plain old enjoy.
So you're telling me that what do you do at the college?
I teach.
Yeah.
I teach at Empire State College, which
Right.
happens to have an office on Plattsburgh State's
Absolutely.
campus. And so it's a college that focuses on adult learners. Our average student age is 38, so I'm dealing with adults all day, every day. But it's also a college that focuses on what students specifically need. So they plan their own degrees and they move forward to achieve exactly what they need for their job or for their future plans or just for their own interest. So I get to do that and teach classes that are specifically about history and about architecture and art and all of the things that I love, including photographs, which are one of my favorite things in the world. And then I come here and I talk
How
with
many
people
hours?
here.
How many hours do you spend here?
Well, I spend 2 complete days. We're here on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 9 to 5, but I also, end up doing things on the weekend and in the evenings. So it's 2 complete office days and then whatever else happens along the way.
You're accessible so that people can call you on the telephone. How do they do that?
Well, our office number is 565-4749. And
518, of course, because
518,
people
of
are
course.
watching this in Australia and
Okay.
Cucamonga and South Oshkosh and who knows where.
Well, and certainly we get a lot of inquiries from outside of the 518 area code. So it's 518-565-4749, and we answer calls and questions as best we can. People also can get in touch with me by email.
And that is?
And that is pratta@co.clinton.ny.us. It's a long email address. But that gets to me, and we get inquiries there daily from all over the world, actually. And we answer them, as we can.
And the website.
And the website, yes. And our county government website is clintongov.com,
Testing her now.
actually. So it's CLINTONGOV.com.
There are many myriad ways to find it. Thank
There
God
are.
the internet now is getting simple for simple people like me. So if you just give them a clue.
If you do, just any search engine, type Clinton County, New York, and you're going to get the website. And there's a special site or a page on the website that's the historian's office, which the wonderful web designers at the county have increased and made great. There are links to all of the local municipal historians. There are photos from at least some of those municipalities, and there will be more because as I've been scanning and digitizing, the people upstairs have been adding images, so you can go to the website and find a picture of Dannemora Prison as it looked in 1960, or you can go find a picture of a house or an activity in Chazy. It'll all be there, so you can.
You might
find
even
it.
see your great grandmother if you look far enough, right, Bobby?
Some people will, for sure.
So what you do is fun. You love it here. If you're developing a package for your lifetime, I don't know what your future will bring, but you're happy in your skin right now,
I
as I
am.
like to say. I'm happy with the skin I'm in.
That's right.
That's wonderful. I'm so delighted. I hope you don't mind me prying into your
No,
life,
that's
but
fine.
I've watched what you were doing ever since you were a little girl, and I'm so proud to be sitting here today. I was so thrilled when Calvin says, "Guess where we're going?" At 1 o'clock. No, make that 1:30 this afternoon. Which brings, and this is Anastasia Pratt, for people who just turned their television set on. Too bad. You could have TiVoed this whole thing and watched it right
That's
from
right.
the very beginning. This is a cool book, and you have to
Thank you.
tell me, this is supposedly the purpose we're here. Tell me about it.
Well, the book is called Clinton County, and it's part of the Images of America series that Arcadia publication puts out.
If you're not familiar with this series, then you don't know much about what's going on in this field, because they're everywhere.
They
like
are.
Chicken Little, they're everywhere, they're everywhere.
It's a wonderful series because it uses images from a local community to tell the history of that community. And this book is focused on Clinton County, telling about the different facets of life in this county from about 1873 until the 1990s. That's the range of
Isn't that
photos.
cool? So how did you get involved with it?
Well, I said photographs are one of my favorite things. And
Of course.
I did mean that. I really love photos. And we have a great collection of photographs that I've enjoyed getting to know. So when I got an email from an editor from the press, I thought, well, why not? These are wonderful pictures, and unless I hijack people and bring them in to look at them, they're never going to see
As I
them.
mentioned before, how many people should
Right.
be here and never don't even know that you are the Clinton County historian
true.
now. Well, we'll blabber that every chance we get, so they'll know about you.
So I thought, well, perfect. This is the way to do it. So I went through the photographs and I arranged some. Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I arranged some
I'm just
categories.
smiling at Bob.
And I was actually very fortunate as I was picking photographs. A wonderful lady named Cynthia Rowe came into the office with a collection of shopping bags and boxes. And all of those shopping bags and boxes originally were the property of a woman named Mattie Cheeseman.
Oh my gosh.
So she had.
Is that how that all happened, Robert? I love it.
And I immediately called Bob Cheeseman, who is, of course, our Chazy historian, and said, hey, guess what I've got? And I was grateful that he was as pleased with them as I was. So I at least had one partner in crime. I could say, yay, look at this. But it was wonderful. It was like the woman's whole life in a couple of bags. And they happened to be with Cynthia.
Is it only in the North Country? A woman's
Yeah.
whole life in a couple of bags.
It was just, there
I
were,
call them treasures. Wonderful
absolutely.
treasures.
Letters, her son's baby book, photographs, wedding pictures, but also newspaper clippings. Some about her family, like when her family had the Century Farm Award for New York State, but others were patterns that she wanted to make or recipes that she wanted to try. It's like getting a picture of a woman I never met, but I feel like I know.
Do you know, I'm sure you do, I'm speaking now generically, do you know how many people who are no longer with us, right up until, I would say, the 1960s, did this in their homes, especially farm people?
Yeah.
And I know a farm family who developed so much paperwork in their lifetime because they counted every seed in every package that they bought and planted,
Yes.
and how long the row was and what the yield was. And this is a complete aside, and I won't monopolize any more of the program with this story, except that when these people died, somebody went into their home and there were boxes and boxes of paperwork. And they were given to somebody. And the man brought all these boxes up to the radio station that I worked at the time and started opening them up. And I was, like a kid in a candy shop.
Absolutely.
And I found one whole box that was dedicated to my life and that of some of the other radio announcers at the radio station. These people all but transcribed every word I said all those years on the radio.
Wow.
They knew what my first wife's name was. They knew Kay's name, how many kids we each had, and it was almost frightening. Mm-hmm. When people fix on something And they
they
wrote
really?
everything down. On their walls were telephone numbers just written in pen on their walls in the kitchen. So they wanted to call the doctor. They didn't have speed dial. So a lot of people did that, and if you had access to all those archives,
Oh my goodness.
you would redefine the word archivist.
Yes. Yes,
But-
well, and open up, a wonderful set of resources for people in the county, which is, the ultimate goal. Now these pictures are available and those clippings and those files. So anyone who wants to know about farming life in Ellenburg
Oh,
from, say 1910 to the 1970s has a chance of finding out about farming life in Ellenburg.
yeah. So we would encourage your grandmother to let Anastasia Pratt and the Clinton County Historian's Office know about these papers, even if you could copy them, if they didn't want to
Exactly.
give you the whole.
I tell people all the time I'm happy to go out with my scanner and computer and scan documents
It
so
can
that
be
they
done.
last.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And many people have donated these things to special collections.
Well, there are other places to get the information, absolutely. Special Collections at Feinberg Library at Plattsburgh State has a wonderful set of resources for people looking at local history. The Clinton County Historical Association does.
Of course.
Each of the local historians' offices has wonderful collections. And since Bob is with us, I can talk about his specifically. He has a wonderful collection that includes artifacts and documents and photographs, and he adds to it regularly. He's out and about taking pictures of local events because, as someone said to me earlier today, what happened 5 minutes ago is history. And so we
Well, there's no
maintain
question.
as we
Yeah,
go.
I'm glad you pointed that out when we began our interview today. We are making history.
Yes.
This program, thanks to what Calvin started way back in the early
Yes.
1980s, is an archive. And before he finishes putting the things that he's done, and my small effort since 1997, on the websites at Plattsburgh.com and HometownCableNetwork.com, there will be as many as 15,000 separate things,
Wow.
including ball games and kindergarten
yes.
graduations, Christmas shows, and I don't maybe even a few nutcrackers if we were to know the half of it. So this had to be a huge kick for you. This process took how long?
The process, it was actually pretty fast, but it took about, I think, 7 months from start to finish.
That's amazing. In today's world,
Yeah.
to do something like this in 7 months. You were a dervish during that whole
I did
time.
work. I worked pretty hard, I guess, but it
And you
worked
loved
for me.
every minute of
Oh, I
it.
did. The hardest part was choosing which photos to include and which to not include. But after I made those tough decisions, I had just such a fun time going through the pictures, going through the archives to find information about the people in the pictures or the places in the pictures.
You know, I have such admiration for people like you. And for Calvin, whose name hardly ever gets mentioned and his face never gets shown on this program unless he drops the camera and somebody picks it up and points it at him. Because he's been involved in several of these books.
Yes.
And he's done a great deal of research on his own. So there are a lot of amateur historians to assist people like you who are the real pros. And all these things are able to give pleasure to future generations because our
Oh, yes.
posterity is important, even though we kind of forget about them in our crazy lives.
Absolutely. Well, and I think that, just to say about the historians, I think that we are lucky in this region. We have a lot of people who love history, and I think that every one of their voices and every single piece of work that they do is important. And I don't know that I'd call myself a pro. I think that I'm just one of the voices, and
You get paid a little bit at it.
I do. Well,
in
that's
that
true. I'm lucky in that regard.
But you
I'm
are.
paid.
Your enthusiasm renders you a professional all by itself. I've thought for a long time, and Calvin agrees because we talk about it every chance we get, about the history in this area.
Yes.
And some of it is unknown to the general public. So that, we have our
Yeah.
video shovel here and we dig up the past
Yes.
and preserve it for people. And every time I sit down at a table with somebody like you, it's like I should earn another bachelor's degree because I learned things about their family. And as you go on, and because you're your mother's daughter, you tie things together
Yeah.
because everything is connected. All these families are connected in ways that will boggle your mind when you get into it, especially here in the North Country.
It's true.
And so, how many pictures in this book?
There are, I think, 183 pictures.
She thinks 183. I'll bet you there's 183 and not one more.
Probably. It's probably true.
And so the hardest part, as you mentioned, or at least alluded to, is leaving some of your favorites out. Excuse
Yes. Yes, because we have easily 4 times as many photos as are in this book in our collection. And I'm always on the lookout for more pictures to add. I've certainly sent email messages to all of my school friends saying, hey, look, those pictures from when we were in grade school and high school, you got to send me copies, because they become these images for another generation. But that was the hard part, is choosing.
We have to reiterate something we've said many times before. People think of photography as relatively new. It's been around for a long
It has.
time. If we didn't have Brady's photographs of the Civil War, we would know a lot less about what
Yes.
really happened through those incredible images. But long before the Civil War, history was being developed in this nation.
Absolutely.
And as you've mentioned, there are pictures in people's, I'm trying to cull through some of my paperwork and pictures. Can you imagine what my place is like? And I'll open a drawer and there's a one of those proverbial bags that the lady had when
Yes.
she came. And I'll open it up and there are 200 black and white photographs from my childhood. And of course I can never throw any of that away. So this is the bane of my wife's existence.
I'm
But I
kind of
love-
maniacal about the photographs, too, as my mother would tell you if she had the chance.
So how did you decide which ones to do first?
Well, at first I decided on the categories. And so the chapters are based on categories of facets of life in Clinton County. So there are family pictures, and there are pictures of religious organizations, there are pictures of businesses, there are pictures of military life, since we have a long military history, pictures of schools, since schools are important to me and to the community, pictures of governmental organizations and events, and then I finished off with just pictures of things that are fun, because there are certainly a lot
I
of
started with that one.
a lot of fun things about life in Clinton
yeah.
County. And then I just tried to pick the images that best told those stories. So from a variety of times, I think that our earliest photo in the book is from 1873, and that's probably about the earliest image we have in the office, to be
No
honest.
kidding.
And then the latest one is in the 1990s. I could have done later than that, but I thought that was a good cutoff, that it was far enough in the past, but knew that it didn't seem too recent, but wasn't so far in the past that it was totally distant either.
The book is a commentary on many facets of life here in the North Country, but it also underlines something that we have regurgitated at least 2,000 times since we've been together, in that take your grandmother's photographs, not only decide whether you want to give Anastasia copies in the historian's office, but get her while she's still facile enough with her mind to tell you whether that was Uncle Charlie or
Yes.
Aunt Hepzibah in that picture. It wasn't always easy to tell, because people drop photographs on my doorstep, beautiful photographs that they found sitting on their way to the dump
Yep.
with no names. And this brings me to page 13, and a charming, it's the old quintessential boy and his dog. Look at this boy and then look at that beautiful dog down here.
Mm-hmm.
And you have no clue
No idea who it is.
what the dog's name is or what the boy's name is right now.
One of my favorite pictures in the book, and I have no idea who it is.
Now, why did I focus on that? How did I read your mind? Because we are on many of the same wavelengths, and I'm delighted to be here. But you know what? Somebody's watching this program who might know who that is, and the phone will ring off the hook.
And I would love to hear that. And certainly I've heard about a couple of images in this book. I haven't had any names of people yet, but I did discover that some of our original documents, some of the photographs that had been labeled by other people, had been labeled incorrectly. So I had one photograph of a plane from the Plattsburgh Air Force Base. It came out of a collection of materials that were given to us by the Plattsburgh Liaison Committee, that Clyde Lewis's committee to celebrate people on the Air Force Base.
With him for such a long time.
It was, labeled officially as a KC-135, and I've had 3 Air Force veterans who worked on planes on Plattsburgh Air Force Base call me or pull me aside in a room and say, that's not a KC-135, it's a KC-97. I absolutely believe them, and so in a future edition it'll be changed, but the official document is listed as a KC-135. So,
But it's even more fun when they can make corrections. You
oh,
can't,
absolutely.
Of course, that adds to it.
And history is a living and breathing thing. It's not ever done. There's always something new to learn, even if you're talking about a family that lived 200 years ago or a house that was built 100 years ago. There's always something new that can emerge.
You love architecture.
I do.
And you love a lot of the old homes in Clinton County.
I do.
And Calvin and I have spent quite a bit of time with some of the books that you know
Yes.
from, there were a couple of them written by the late professor, what's his name?
Alan Everest.
Alan Everest. And just like you said, some of the information in his books were incorrect, and you would be chagrined to know that today, but you know what you know at the moment. But we still have some pretty decent buildings here in Clinton County.
We do, of all sizes and shapes.
And many of the buildings that are extant now, when you drive around, were former one-room schoolhouses, were log homes that have been turned into anything but a log home now. So isn't that neat?
Oh, yeah. Or little workers' houses that were one room big that are now bigger houses. You'd never think that the family who lived there originally lived in one room.
And we are fortunate in that we do live in a relatively rural area where a lot of these old buildings are preserved one way or the other.
Yes.
And every time I drive down the Military Turnpike and look at that old Robinson Tavern, I try in my mind to hear the music and see the dancing and eat the food and imagine what it would look like had somebody had the foresight and the wherewithal to get that thing preserved.
Yes.
Huh?
Yes, absolutely. Although I have to say I'm grateful that at least it's been preserved as much as it has.
As it is. But there are a lot of people who are interested in North Country history here.
Oh, yes.
And I think we'll bring them out of the woodwork, as they say, with this program, and that's one of the results of this wonderful program that Calvin started with Bob Venn so many years ago.
Yes.
And that we've done since 1997. Our Kent DeLord House is this one of the most famous photographs of buildings in the area.
Oh, absolutely.
It was Plattsburgh's only real claim to historical architectural fame for a long, long time, and it's still such a wonderful place, and we're glad to see it still open and people tour.
Well, and kids, too. I mean, if we talk about the school kids again, certainly every one of my nieces and nephews has been there on a school field trip and comes home talking about the doctor or talking about the painting they saw in a room, because it gives history in a different way, not just a textbook.
Well, and now talk about some of your all-time favorite photographs that are in this book. So you had to do a lot of research, as much as you could, for every single picture here.
And they brought me to very different places. I love all of the photographs that are in that Cheeseman collection, in part because they're farm photographs, and I have a very special, soft spot in my heart for farms, farmhouses, farm families, farm life in general. And there's some that are fun, kids peeking around corn stalks and playing on sleds and building snow forts and just doing fun stuff on the farm. But then there's also a really, truly wonderful picture of a billboard from the 1950s or 1960s talking about why people should come to Clinton County, which I think is just amazing.
Isn't that wonderful?
Oh, the images are great, and they're so, now they seem vintage, but they were absolutely cutting edge for the time that the billboard was erected, and I love that picture. And then there are other fun pictures, like a city police officer somewhere around 1920 standing next to probably the first city speed limit sign, which is also fun in a different way.
Isn't that, People were telling me about the first traffic light that they ever saw. You talk to people, I love to talk to people in their 90s who are 100 years old. The first car they saw, the first traffic light they saw,
Yeah.
the first stop sign.
Yeah, well, it's all a big deal, things we take for granted, but when it first appears, forget about it. Whoa,
Then you have
what
to
is
teach
that?
the horse what stop means, you know? You know, you've got a chapter on religion. How could you not when you talk about the
Yes.
history of Clinton County? And there's an image here on the lower left-hand side that probably is new to many of the people watching this program, because this is the old Methodist church that was on Oak Street in Plattsburgh.
Yes.
And it burned in 1956. And it was a conflagration that was only matched when Hawkins Hall burned some
Right.
years before that. This was a huge fire, and this church was a landmark, so I'm glad you have that image in here. Along with kids, look at this. I
know.
just love it.
And one of the keys homesteads to bring in the Underground Railroad and the Quaker Union in Peru.
Well, how can you not?
Oh, yeah.
Quaker Union,
All of
that's
the
a whole
history.
chapter of history.
Yes.
And once again, I hope we can inspire
Yes.
young people and old people who are watching this to get into this history. To just go, you know, when Kay and I raised our family, we didn't have much money for long vacations, but we said more than once, get in the car. We're going to the old Quaker cemetery.
Oh, yes. Well, I
We're
remember.
going to read gravestones. Yep, that's what we're going to do.
I remember, in school, since I went to school in Peru, one field trip every year was always to the Quaker cemetery.
Don't you love it?
Oh, I did, and I was fortunate. I mean, this Keys homestead actually is owned by one of my former teachers and her husband. So I was really fortunate because two people who committed themselves to maintaining the built environment of history, and also her husband, Ann and Lincoln Sunderland are the people I'm referring to. Lincoln has done a whole lot to catalog Peru's history,
What?
and they introduced generations of school
What
kids
a
to history.
building. If you ever go to Harkness that way, you can't miss it. It's right
That's
there on the
right.
corner.
Beautiful, with a wonderful historic marker in front.
And I wish they had a grant for $5 million to absolutely restore it to,
Yes.
restore it to its original splendor. And he took me through the house 30 years ago, but I'm just mesmerized by everything in every room.
Oh, yes, it's wonderful, from the big, wonderful hearths to the barn with the, false wall. It's great, and it really is indicative of our history. All the stops on the Underground Railroad helping bring slaves to freedom in Canada, but also of our agricultural history and our religious history, because it certainly has a lot to do with the Quakers and you can't tell the story of Clinton County's history without talking about that Quaker Union and those folk.
In our recent political cycle, as they call it, midterm elections, there has been a lot of discussion of the separation between church and state and what our founding fathers meant and so on. But it certainly is an integral part of the history of the North Country.
Yes.
Various religions and very small groups and large groups, part of larger groups, right from the very beginning.
Absolutely.
And we're talking here about the Trinity Episcopal Church and a related church in South Plattsburgh, the Episcopal Mission Church, because there's a lot of history right there.
Oh, absolutely.
And fortunately, we do have people who are really concerned with the history of the churches in
Yes.
Clinton County. And I've seen a lot of those hand-typed histories. So have you, Gloria. So have we all by now.
Yes.
And bless those people who took time to collect that information. And when we didn't have computers or any other way to copy it except with the old-fashioned copy paper and mimeograph machines
Yes.
and so on.
Yeah.
So bless those historians who decided to do that. Oh my goodness. Look at this.
And the actual version of that portrait is huge. It's
Was it really big?
It's certainly at least it's bigger than 11 by 17.
You gotta be kidding.
No, it's huge.
Where is it?
It's over in our map cabinet. It's this wonderful, huge portrait of
Oh my.
Of the
Monsignor
Monsignor.
person. Yes. Oh.
I don't know how we got it, but it's wonderful. It's terrific.
Say his name again to people.
I'm sorry,
Monsignor
it's
Brisson.
Monsignor Brisson, yes, who was at Our Lady of Victory Church in Plattsburgh.
From 1950 to 1978.
Yes.
I remember him very, very well. So how many chapters in the book?
Oh, that's a hard one. I think that there are.
You don't
it's either
have to know
6
everything.
or 8, maybe.
Well, we have 8
8,
categories.
okay.
Family life, religion, education, agriculture, business and industry, government and civic organizations, military, and leisure. And then there's also the proverbial bibliography, which
Yes.
you try to give credit where credit is
Yes.
due, and it's not always easy, especially when you're working with photographs.
It's not always easy, and it's also not always easy to find the authors of those earlier histories. So it's another piece of information that I always love to get. You know, who was working at St. Peter's Church writing that mimeographed or carbon copied paper that gave some history. But wherever possible, we certainly gave credit to folks.
Thank God for my teachers who put up with this guy whom they said on my kindergarten report card was incorrigible. I didn't even know what that word meant at the time. It's not something I'm going to bear repeating because it's certainly embarrassing even now in retrospect. But these people who taught in these 1- and 2-room schoolhouses were champions in every sense of the word to inspire these rural farm kids who had no more idea that they wanted anything past a 4th or 5th grade education to go on to college. And I think, I mention her name as often as I can. Her name was Agnes Labarge, who, as much as my parents did, inspired me to read. And that ravenous appetite was inspired by this woman from 5th grade through 8th grade. And so, I had a chance to thank her well up into her 80s, and then I realized that she had died in the Northern Tier. And when I was on the radio, I read an obituary without having seen it before, and I almost broke down and cried as I read it because it was my dear late teacher, Agnes Labarge. So some of these pictures that you have here are glorious. And I do have a scarred photograph of the old 2-room schoolhouse in Messina Center where I lived at that time. I didn't have a photograph before because who takes one when you're in 4th grade or 3rd grade?
Right.
And I got a copy of this photograph which another family besides me had grown up with. And so they had their red and blue and orange crayons drawing pictures around all the faces. And I did my best to retrieve the picture. But it's a treasure for that reason and for so many others.
Absolutely.
So you have some wonderful historical photographs of education in this area.
We do. We're very fortunate. And they're photos I love to share with people whenever they come in.
I want to show this one because Bob Cheeseman is here and because we love this piece of the minor history in Clinton County, because this was one of the most cutting-edge institutions of its time when William H. Minor decided to do something. He did not spare the horses. Not in his Heart Delight Farm, not in that school, and there are still people alive who taught there and attended there. They write about it often. And it's on the same location, right, as the new school is now. But it seems like every week somebody tells me a story about the old school and how fabulous it was. Like the old Physicians Hospital that he built in 1926.
Yes.
Was, talk about state of the art.
I know.
Of course, I love ghost stories, so I like
the stories about those
people are
places.
telling me about those places. So that's beautiful that you have all those photographs. Oh my goodness! And who did somebody help you when you were sitting there with all these photographs on a table somewhere?
Well,
Was your mother over your shoulder saying, no, don't take that one? I'd never heard of that person before.
no, no, she wasn't. But a lot of the choices happened at this very table, and so if I was bouncing back and forth between a couple, I certainly did hold them up for my mom and say, hey, what do you think? Which one do you think does a more effective job? So there were conversations, and then as people came in, obviously I talked about them, and pictures that everybody seemed to gravitate toward, I included.
You know, they say, and I've mentioned it on this show a million times, certainly didn't invent the phrase that a picture is worth 1,000 words. But I'm a student of many, many things, why people think they do and how they get passionate about things. And I believe that each photograph, including the ones you've reproduced here, each contains an intrinsic memory.
Yes.
And if you stare at it long enough and you touch it and you think about it, then maybe you can absorb some of the history. We talked about the 1956 fire involving the Methodist Church. Here was a fire that happened in 1929 that we alluded to earlier, before it was even called Hawkins Hall, as part of the normal school. If you were to think in your mind how many names that institution has had since it began in something like 1889 or whatever it
Yes.
was, it's amazing. And yet, like the phoenix, it rose from the ashes and is an institution that has great respect.
Absolutely, and a building that has
I'm
great
not just
respect.
saying that because you work there, but
No,
it is. It's a wonderful campus, a great
It is.
institution.
It absolutely is.
And, you know, it's not called the State Teachers College or the normal school anymore, but how
No.
many people do I know, including a number of family members from my wife's family, who were educated and taught there?
Yes.
And I might mention that the late, great Addie Shields
Yes.
taught grade school there
She did, and
in 1939.
she was a graduate of the normal school and a local teacher.
Isn't that cool?
It is. And actually, there's a photo of Addie later on in this book.
Oh, is there really?
There is, because it's pretty difficult to have a history of Clinton County without Addie being included.
Well, and you know, we've talked a lot about nurses and nurses' uniforms, and every time they have any kind of a, we'll do it with any excuse at all, but when they have a milestone at CVPH Medical Center, we'll go back and interview the nurses and the teachers
Yes.
who taught nursing, and it's so glorious because many of those people in their 80s and 90s are still around from the old nursing schools and the old nursing programs.
And they have a very different story to tell. You know, I was talking earlier before we started taping, I mentioned the secretary at my college office, who's a local woman, and she was telling me about, you know, her grandmother. When her grandmother brought home her kids from the hospital, they came home literally in a wicker basket, and the nurse came home with them because they weren't allowed to carry the baby to the car or from the car to the house. You know, so there's that kind of history that's there as well, because it's not the way we
Wow.
do things now.
Wicker basket.
I know,
Doesn't
just
that take us back to Moses? I mean, come on.
at least alludes to him.
In the
huh?
bulrushes. But, you know, and it's important to mention that even in my lifetime, I'm 30 years younger than Bob Cheeseman, no. But even in my lifetime, most babies were born at home,
Right.
in a private home, you know? Appendectomies were performed on the kitchen table by some of the doctors that are still alive in our area.
Yeah.
So if you were lucky enough to be born in a hospital and came home in a wicker basket, as I was, but I was born in what was called a nursing home, a small hospital
Right.
in Pearl River, New York. I love these old, you were into the rural section, the farming
Oh, yes.
section. Look at this tractor. I mean, horses were king. And I've driven a lot of horses with dump rakes in the old days on the old farms, but those old metal tractors and steam combines and
Sure.
thrashing machines. See, I'm saying it the right way, thrashing machine, even though it's spelled with an E and not an A. But rural life.
Oh,
This
well,
pretty well sums it up, doesn't it, for Clinton
absolutely.
County?
I mean, that is our history, and I'm so grateful that there are people around to maintain that history as well. You know, certainly the Babby Farm Museum in Peru, which is
Oh,
wonderful.
I just directed somebody out there who lives here and had no clue that that museum was there.
It's
You
wonderful.
know, so I said, get in the car. And I drove them
Yes.
past it at least because it was in the evening. And I said, you go there, grab your grandchildren.
Absolutely. And,
Oh, my
and
goodness.
even, other people who maintain a different side of the past, like the Trombleys with their collection of tractors. And I know I've seen your episode about that. It's
And we
my
love
dad's
the old
favorite.
tractors, of course.
But that's certainly a huge part of our history and part that we have to remember and celebrate.
What would we do without the Cheeseman family photographs?
Well, I guess I did have a bias toward the Cheeseman family photographs. I really love them. They're such real pictures where you can almost smell the earth and you can feel the wind in some of them.
Is this the stereotypical sugar house? I mean,
Absolutely.
take a look at this here. Calvin and I and Bob, and I'm sure you too, Gloria, have fond memories of sugaring as a kid. The old wood-fired evaporators, where somebody had to stay awake all night long throwing wood in that thing. How did we ever make it to school each day? And maybe that's why I was incorrigible even later on. And there fortunately are quite a few extant photographs of the downtown Plattsburgh.
Yes.
And most communities have those.
Mm-hmm.
Many were turned into postcards.
We have a lot of postcards of
Some were
downtown Plattsburgh.
hand-colored,
Yes.
hand-tinted, as they say, and others were actually colored pictures. But the old pictures of downtown Plattsburgh, I appreciate, because many of the buildings are still there.
Yes.
During, and I won't say during the reign of, but during the time when Clyde Rabideau was the mayor of Plattsburgh, there was a push on to restore a lot of those storefronts and the friezes and the tops of the buildings. And so downtown Plattsburgh looks pretty darn good right now, especially down on what they now call Durkee Street, formerly River Street,
Yes.
with the clocks and the lights and the so on.
Absolutely. And I think business owners now are redoing even more buildings, so it's beautiful. The paint's being restored, and mercifully, a lot of those business owners have maintained some of the wonderful old signs. So the signs painted on the brick buildings haven't been covered with a new business emblem. They're the old business emblem, and they're just beautiful. It makes a real vibrant community gathering place as opposed to any number of different alternatives.
And who among us, except for you very young people watching this program, didn't grow up in an area where you had a little general store? And these photographs will spark your memory of that little store. And I just remember so well of the barrels with the cookies and the crackers and the dill pickles that seemed like they were a foot long. And the store owner would give me a pickle, and I was in heaven. I'd sit there cross-legged on watch the old guys play checkers with the barrel and the checkerboard on top, and they'd forget the little guy was there, and they say words that should never be said over a checker game. And who can ever forget penny candy? And those were the days. I'm waxing here, Those were the days when you didn't go in and pick a 5-pound bag of sugar off the shelf and push a cart around the store, because the store was maybe as big as this office. And you told the clerk, and they'd have this long arm thing with a handle on it and little fingers that would grab that box of pep off the top shelf, right, Bobby? Bring it down and put it down there. And many times, if you wanted 5 pounds of beans, they scooped out 5 pounds of beans or flour and put it in a brown paper sack.
Right.
And butcher's, that's where I first learned what butcher's paper was, They wrapped everything in butcher's paper. Those little country stores and the little gas stations and the penny candy. We were talking about which penny candy we loved the other night, and I liked some kinds of penny candy that kids wouldn't like today, and they certainly wouldn't be able to buy for a penny. And it's always a pleasure for me each year when not too many kids show up for Halloween, because that means I get all the... Oh, look at this.
Yeah.
Look at this picture.
I was ever so grateful to find a picture of the Pyramid Mall entry, because that was,
I didn't know that picture existed until this moment.
yeah.
I'm way more excited than I should be for a man of my advanced age. Because how I still refer to it as the North Mall and the South Mall.
Yes.
Give me a break.
I know. And there's a whole generation of people locally who do.
Yeah.
And I loved also looking at this picture the other day, that in the distance you can see the ski shop that was there, but then also I think a little further over there's the old Michigan restaurant.
See that?
Yeah.
Talk about Michigans. I hope people may be watching this in Michigan who have no idea what a Michigan is.
Yes.
It's your loss and our gain. And a nice lady by the name of Otis, as far as I know, had the first Michigan stand in the bottom of the Champlain Theater here in downtown Plattsburgh, and eventually moved it south of town. It's still a story that's not completely written as to how the Michigans got here and why they called them Michigans in the first place.
It started at Pike Cantonment.
Oh, I'm sure that's what happened. And they burned it to the ground, so that's why we don't have the original message. Seeing this picture, each one of these things is going to inspire memories in different ways for people, depending on how old they are. Since I was in the radio business for 36 years, of course, it was a big deal when they opened these malls and Pyramid.
Oh, I bet.
And I have to tell you that I wasn't always the fattest guy on the block. It's all those Halloweens with all that candy left over that make the difference. But at a certain point in time when Mrs. Harding came to town to work with marketing at the Pyramid Center, I don't have any idea what the occasion was, but she made me dress in a Superman costume and stand on a stage. And if one of those photographs ever showed up, I would have to hide in the closet for 6 months or more from terrible embarrassment. But there are wonderful memories. Bonanza is one.
Mm-hmm.
How well we remember that there on Cornelia Street, and our good friend Captain Frank Pabst and the Juniper, which is as much a part of this area's history as anything.
Absolutely.
Calvin and I recently did a program on canal boat, the history of canal boats. Such a huge part of the history of this area and transportation with the canal boats. And I can only think of all my early conversations with Frank Pabst back in the 60s talking about tugboats and canal boats. Just wonderful. Oh, come on. We could spend three or 4 days here. Explain some of these pictures on these pages as I
Sure.
show them to Calvin. He can look at any of
They're
them he likes.
a varied crew. On the top left-hand corner, there's a picture of the Lozier factory. Now the current Georgia Pacific factory, although the company has a different name. That used to be the Lozier factory where they produced automobiles and boats. So that's a picture of work inside. And the bottom of that page is the Ryan Carriage Works. And
Goodness,
that
I love it.
picture was actually donated by Andy Ryan, who I think probably sat here with Addie and labeled the photo.
I'm
So
sure he did.
the words, the words like the man with the mustache, those are his words about his relatives
Yeah.
in the past. Other pictures on here, I think that there's a logging picture from Rouse's Point with the lumber getting ready to cross the border. And then I think the other one is maybe a milk truck. Yeah, it's the milk truck. And actually we had a woman come in the other day who was thrilled to see that milk cart with the horse and wagon because she remembered buying milk from him. And she actually had to call her husband immediately and say, "Guess what's in the book? I didn't know there was a
Don't you love
picture."
it?
It was wonderful.
You know, that's a chapter of the history that Calvin and I wanted to help archive.
We're going to.
Huh?
We're going to.
We've told ourselves that for the last 13 years. And unfortunately for us, these old people with the memories are leaving us and going to a better place, as they say. And so we're getting short of people who can tell us about what Bayview Dairy was, and Rosebud Dairy, and Plattsburgh Dairy. Well, we always cover such great ground when the camera's not on.
I know.
Some of the stuff may not be printable, but most of it was all above board and respectable today. The logging business in Clinton County, another huge part of history. This particular picture on the bottom is an all-time favorite of mine. I've seen loads of logs like that. I talked to my father-in-law, who was a little man, the late Alfred Vaughn, who worked in the woods, and told me stories about how they would get a team of horses to pull a load of logs that was 12 and a half cords of wood. That's not a face cord, believe me. And in the wintertime, of course, they relied on ice-covered roads, and they'd wet them down to
Absolutely.
make them slippery. But how they used crowbars and peavies and anything to get that load started, and then heading downhill to get it stopped. And they had special devices. People want to learn more about that. I would send them to the Blue Mountain Lake, the Adirondack Museum in Blue Mountain
Absolutely.
Lake, because they've done a wonderful job in preserving thousands of photographs from that time period.
Yeah.
The J.J. Rogers Company, James J.J. Rogers III worked at the radio station with me locally, and eventually moved to Saranac Lake and opened his own radio station with he and his wife, WNBC. And he's always the tallest man in the room. It's just wonderful. So these are great memories. Government and civic organizations. How could you not?
Exactly.
How could you not? Oh my goodness. I have seen so many photographs of the Clinton County Courthouse. I mean, we're only a few feet away from here. And I'm not a historian, and I know 10,000 stories connected with this whole region. And a lot of it has to do, because I love the paranormal and ghost stories, has to do with public hangings, where
Yes.
people would get a ticket and come and watch somebody. You get the kids in there, make a picnic lunch.
I know.
And there was a gallows right on the corner there.
There was.
Isn't that amazing? But that's an historic building, and many times Calvin and I have stood on the front lawn and watched the parades go by on
Oh,
the 4th of
yes.
July or any other time. And the Clinton County Government Center, you show the bottom shot there, even though it's just a work in progress. The complex we're standing in right now in the historian's office was not started until 1974.
Right.
And these are all personal asides, you know, I have to interject my own life into this. When I came to work here on July 4th in 1961, what you're looking at right there was a radio station, WEAV, at 38 Court Street. And I parked my car there and worked there for 3 months and was fired and was told I'd never amount to anything. And I spent the rest of my life trying to live up to that image. But strangely enough, all those years later in 1997 when I left radio and went to work as a crime victims advocate in the probation department in this building, guess where I parked my car? In the same place in the Clinton County Government Center. So talk about history repeating itself. And here's Addie
There's Addie.
with Mario Cuomo. Interesting in light of the midterm elections that we've just
Indeed.
gone through. I really couldn't wait to see Palladino bring the baseball bat to Albany. And he did, I guess, as an afterthought after he lost the election for governor of New York State. But there's a much younger Addie.
Yes.
Isn't that wonderful?
Yes.
We spent a lot of time in the quadricentennial year talking about Samuel de Champlain, didn't we, Gloria?
Sure did.
Gloria, your mommy turns up in the most interesting places.
Yes, she does.
She was at Babby's in their own little corner when the farm museum opened up. And, this whole quadricentennial year with Samuel de Champlain. And still, we didn't get the international recognition that we all pined and dreamed for up here. I don't know what it takes. Sometimes you need that baseball bat to get people's
Yes.
attention. Because we have, and hopefully this program, Our Little Corner and everything else that Calvin does, will help to spotlight some of those things. That's why the internet is a wonderful feature, because somebody
Absolutely.
types Plattsburgh in, and what do they come up with? Plattsburgh.com. With how many on there now? Over 5,000? Over 5,000
500.
separate events. Can you believe it?
Yeah. Yeah, it's
So-
amazing.
Talk about this day in history. People can go back and look at something Calvin found a program. He sent me a link to it, and I had no idea who recorded that. Who recorded that,
I
Calvin?
don't know if it was Bob or me. I can't remember. I didn't watch it.
1993, when some of the guys from the radio station, they're all dead but me, I guess,
Well, George is still around.
and the George Bessel Jr., whose father is the one that hired me at Weave, got together as a presentation to the Clinton County Historical Association on the history of local radio.
Oh, nice.
And I had no idea that it had been recorded. Calvin and I didn't know each other at the time.
Yes,
And all
you
of it.
did. Yes,
Huh?
you did. You did the first voice on local television. Was your voice introducing
Oh.
the corner in '86?
Our little corner,
83. That's right,
Yeah,
83. 10 years before that.
isn't that amazing? So we were friends who had formerly been strangers passing in the night. But I had not, that was a fun thing to see. For me, because I lived it, and for others, because
Sure.
I think of the people who are no longer with us, like Bird Burdan and Chet Bosworth,
Mike Mannix.
and
Mike Mannix.
Mike Mannix is no longer with us, And I saw Marty go by a camera after the elections the other night and thought that he and Mike Mannix were twins, fraternal twins. So anyway, if these memories are that poignant for me, what must they be for the people who are watching this elsewhere? And dare I mention the name Tarmac Jack? You don't even know. That refers to the late John Terrell, who was the mayor of the city of Plattsburgh, who held the office long before anybody dreamed of term limits. A confusing proposition, by the way, on the wrong side of the ballot during our midterm election that drove me crazy. I might mention here, this is for posterity. Districts 1 through 6 in the town of Plattsburgh received an erroneous ballot and voted for the mayor of the city of Plattsburgh, and I know at least 100 people who said, isn't it great they're allowing us to vote for the mayor of Plattsburgh? No, time out, you can't do that, it won't be counted.
Well, certainly we had that, my mom and I, and my dad as well, on our ballots, and we looked at it and said, what is this? I said to the guy, why? We can't vote for the city, but there it is.
We won't cast aspersions, but I found that there was humor in something, right? Let's pause a moment. I don't want to say that we're the biggest blabbermouths in the city. Well, we've talked for an hour and 12 minutes already, and I'm not tired yet. How about you?
No.
Anastasia Pratt, who is a Clinton County historian, such a thrill. And I must say again that we've been remiss not to have been here with our camera and microphone a long time ago.
Oh, well, I'm glad you're here today. The stories
You
are fun.
a charming and intelligent person, and anybody who has this passion for history is a friend of ours. Because I think it's our duty, even if you didn't get paid for it, it's our duty to preserve this history, to archive the history in our minds, and then somewhere to preserve it for future generations. Because hopefully they'll find a way to save these tapes and DVDs and things
Absolutely.
that Calvin has made. We were worried for so many years that all these 10 or 15,000 things were stacked in a room in his house, and if God forbid some terrible tragedy happened, they would be gone. And now they're being archived.
Yeah, which is wonderful.
And isn't it great? He and I talked about it for years. How are we going to save this stuff? Who's going to know it's there? What's going to happen? Do we need to hire college kids to put everything in alphabetical order?
Right.
Anyway, memories of Kent State.
Yes.
If anybody is watching this doesn't know what Kent State was, we won't take a long time to explain it. But it had a great deal to do with the way we thought about things on campuses around the United States, and it
Absolutely.
did affect people at Plattsburgh State in those days, and still does, because they have a commemoration ceremony every year. I think we're the only school that's done it every year since the beginning.
I think so, and I know that that affected me in my college years in the late '90s. That those commemorations still happened, and I love that it still happens. That you can drive by campus on that day and see people gathered around a marker in front of Kehoe, and say, "We remember those college students who died, but we also remember that time of hardship, and we remember all of the many people who shared their thoughts and their lives with our country on all sides of the Vietnam conflict."
You know, I mentioned it before in passing, not knowing that you had a picture of
Yes.
the former Clinton County home. Those homes were often called the poorhouse,
Yes.
and they had other rather disenchanting names, and many times. But those buildings are, I believe they're all apartments now.
They are apartments, and one of the interesting records we have in this office to go along with the Civil War records, we actually have the intake and discharge records from the county home.
Oh, you do?
We do.
Isn't that interesting?
So you can see, who went into the county home, why they were there, how long they stayed, what work they did while they were there, or sometimes what provisions they were given to go back to their own homes with.
We'll tell people where that's located on Route 22, not very far past Culver Hill, where we meet every year
Yes.
for one of the first of our commemorations for the celebrating the Battle of Plattsburgh in September.
Yes.
Because it's just a fur piece up the road and over the hill and there on that on that side, right?
Yes.
Doctors and dentist's office. Look at this one. Is this associated with miners?
Yes.
Tell me.
That picture is actually from the minor school, the original minor school
Is
building.
it really?
Yes, and there was a doctor's office and a dentist office in the building.
One of the greatest pleasures for me, since I began doing this program with Calvin a long time ago, was to meet with a group of doctors called Rodeo. Retired Old Doctors Eat Out. And we locked them all in a room and we chatted.
Nice.
And the walls reverberated with some of the anecdotes and great stories from the old days. And Dr. John Southwick is a dear and wonderful friend. And what did he say he got for an office visit or a home visit? I don't know, $3 or something in the olden days. Just great, wonderful memories. And in case you have never seen a photograph of what the old Physicians Hospital looked like after it was built in 1926, believe me, it was a showplace. We're talking real mahogany and marble, and everything was very special.
Yes.
And even since I came here in 1961, and since I began working on construction on the base in the early 50s, the face of that building has changed so many times.
Yes.
To the point where if Mr. Miner were to drive by today and Alice T were to be in the side of the old buggy, they'd say, "What the heck is that over there? I thought we built a hospital there." Isn't it amazing?
Oh, it is. Absolutely.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. Well, take a look at this sign. There was a lot going on during the first 2 decades of the 20th century here in Plattsburgh, not the least of which was the Plattsburgh idea and the training
Yes.
on the former Plattsburgh Air Force Base. Huh?
I coughed.
Oh, is that all? We appreciate comments anytime from the gallery here. But so people knew about this all over the country, and a lot of very famous people were here back in those days.
Yes.
And so there you go, City of Plattsburgh without the H. It's not just because the guy's standing in front of the sign. Slow down to 15 miles an hour. And we had the extreme pleasure of finding a book from the maneuvers from 1939,
Oh, wow.
which brought how many troops here, Calvin?
50,000.
Yeah, 50,000 people.
Yes.
And hardly a week or a month goes by where somebody doesn't mention that their grandfather was involved. And somebody told me, my brother-in-law, Donald Dashnaw, his mother made him a special backpack when he was a young kid to carry things out to the troops along the roads in the Saranac River, and peanut butter sandwiches and apples and coffee and milk and who knows. Because when you got 50,000 people, all of a sudden, that influx in your community, you have to require a lot of people to support that.
Absolutely, you do.
And it was wonderful. Well, here it is.
Yeah.
1953. Groundbreaking for what was to become the Plattsburgh Air Force Base. Historically significant because prior to that, there was a significant school on that area called Champlain College, not to be confused with the Champlain College
Right.
in Vermont.
Arlington.
And we have interviewed quite a few people who went to school there. It was a great spot for people who had been in the service in the Second World War, and was very popular for a number of years. And all of a sudden, when the aforementioned Clyde Lewis decided that we might want to have another military base here, it was bye-bye Champlain College. So there's an interesting history and controversy because it wasn't universally embraced as an concept. And yet look how long it lasted, and look how many memories all of us have had associated with the former
Absolutely.
Plattsburgh Air Force Base, including those BRAC decisions to close it.
Yes.
And we all labored over that, but that's wonderful with the shovels. Site of the new Plattsburgh Air Force Base Strategic Air Command. We lived through, yes, you mentioned different aircraft. We lived through quite a few airplanes. And now here's just a view of the runway. More concrete than you ever saw in one place in your life. And I was fortunate to have worked on construction to make my way through college back in those days. So I spend a lot of time here, and I think about that. That's a wonderful area of view every time I fly out of our Plattsburgh International Airport, which just recently, as we're recording this in early November 2010, has talked about a relationship they're developing with Spirit Airlines to add more north-south runs. My wife and I just came back from a couple of weeks in Myrtle Beach, and isn't it nice to get on a plane at 7 o'clock in the morning, and before 9 o'clock you're on the beach.
Yes.
And so Calvin and I are pretty proud of our airport here.
Oh, it's a beautiful airport. And it's also wonderful that we were able to use those runways and not let them go to waste sitting on a field
I think
in
about
Plattsburgh.
I think about that. And my grandson Chad Baker and I were talking about the famous or infamous Clifford Ball with the Fish concert that was here.
Oh, yes.
That's a long time ago. You weren't very old when that happened.
Yeah.
We have video of behind the scenes of that on the internet.
Oh,
Do we
very
really?
neat.
No kidding. Because
I-
I spent 3 days without going to bed broadcasting with a early version of what would now be called a portable cell phone. They weighed about 10 pounds, and Chad was on the other corner.
Yeah, Peter Regnier, who's done some video work for me, is part of the Stagehands Union, and they were working there, and he brought his camera, and I've got
No
about a
kidding.
half-hour video of
Oh, that's
behind
wonderful.
the scenes at Clifford
That's
Ball.
wonderful. And talk about controversy.
Well, we could actually hear the concert from our house because I grew up in
you
South
could.
Plattsburgh,
You couldn't.
and I
You
think I
couldn't
was
see Russia from
beginning
there, though, right?
college. No
Okay.
Russia.
Isn't that fun?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, Chad and I were reminiscing. I think that's the only time I've ever been high in my life, just standing there with a microphone and a telephone. Whoa, baby!
I would imagine
That
so.
was quite a time period. Needless to say, they didn't come back. Well, I want to just show this one picture because it's such a special place for me. People sat around my dinner table, or one table in my house, the other day, and we're talking about, what's that? Tell me about that old stone barracks.
Yes.
Is it really haunted? What's the story about that old? And there are a lot of legends which are not true, which people have made up about Revolutionary War soldiers and so on. It wasn't built until 1838, so not likely to be Revolutionary
Right.
soldiers with blood on the walls. The tragedy is that people, and I won't point my finger at any specific population, let us just say young people have decided that it's cool to break in there and start fires and
Right.
do stupid things, and they're trying desperately. The Battle of Plattsburgh Association trying desperately to get grants to preserve that place and turn it into something. Wow. Look at just pick a picture
Yeah.
here. Huh?
Well, it is amazing. And it's amazing we have so many photographs of all of the, well, not all, but most of the eras of military life in Plattsburgh.
Well, we called it the oldest active military installation in the United States for a long time because it was used for so many things in so many different ways, and went all the way back to the War of 1812 with the forts.
Yep.
Scott, Brown, and Moreau in the area, and yes, I have a good friend who loves to play the part of President Theodore Roosevelt, who gave a number of speeches. And I was going to use the vernacular, but I'll choose other words. He got into a unfriendly communications with President Wilson back in those days about what should or shouldn't happen. But let me say about Teddy Roosevelt that he was a good historian himself. And he wrote accounts of the Battle of Plattsburgh, which are have held up pretty well over the years, right? And a lot of famous people, including various presidents, have visited the Plattsburgh area one time or another, because
Yes.
this was a very popular tourist spot way
Absolutely.
back in the 1800s.
With the Hotel Champlain, built, or at least owned for part of its history by the D&H Railroad Company, that built a railroad spur right up to its gates, and presidents went there for a retreat from Washington life.
And the trolley stopped there.
And the trolley stopped there.
I
and
don't know
so-
if the buck stopped there, but the trolley stopped there. And I carry 2 trolley tokens in my pocket at all times from the Plattsburgh Traction Company. Can
Oh,
you
nice.
believe that? Shows you what a nut I am. And here is your famous photograph.
Actually, the one that's mislabeled is a little bit later. But
Oh.
the KC-135 and the KC-97 are in these photographs.
Yeah, it's just so
Yeah.
people see what the planes are now. Our program today, which is originally designed to approximate 90 minutes, is coming to an end. We have about 4 minutes left. And there is, did you see the late Clyde Lewis? I think it's important to show his picture, because before he died, he and Joe Bornstein got together in a room with us, and we talked to both of them at great length.
Oh,
And
that's
have
wonderful.
one of the best programs in our archive, and there are many, of that interview, and
Yeah.
how hard Clyde worked right up almost till the day he died to preserve the base here.
Absolutely. And those Plattsburgh Liaison Committee files feature him quite prominently because of all of that work that he
And,
did.
and should. That
Yes.
I could write a book myself just about those testimonial dinners. Does this one ring a bell with you, Calvin?
We were there.
And I have to say, that's another photo that was mislabeled in our collection. And so
Oh, really?
the
You
caption
didn't
is
know?
incorrect. Well, it was listed as being raising the anchor of the Philadelphia, when actually it's listing the raising of the anchor of the Confiance.
I would say,
So,
even though for 40 years I called it the Confiance, we learned how many words has the pronunciation changed
oh,
since
gosh.
you were a little girl? And with me, and Bob, you know that's true. Where all of a sudden we decided to pronounce it different in the 1990s than in all the science and history books since the beginning of time. And my wife and I laugh about that all the time. What was wrong with calling it Uranus? Why do we have to call it Uranus?
Because it sounds like
Because,
something
yeah,
else.
well, but I mean, that's true of so many.
Oh, yes.
The Caribbean and the Caribbean and, on and on and on. I won't say this is your lifetime achievement, but you packed a lot into this little book.
There is a lot in there.
How, now that we have a couple minutes left, how can people get a copy of it?
Well, the Cornerstone Bookshop has copies, definitely.
Nancy Donahoe.
Nancy Donahoe does.
We love her to death.
And the Clinton County Historical Association, but there are lots of other places too. I'm going to get the name wrong, and I apologize ahead of time, but the locally owned pharmacy in Champlain, Rouse's Point, has copies.
Cornerstone.
That's
Is it the
called the
Cornerstone?
It
I
is.
thought so, and then I thought I was wrong.
How interesting you should mention.
I mean, you know, I'm
Yeah.
from here, so I don't know as much about there. But Conroy's Organic also has copies, and
How much?
the book is $21.99, and that's the Arcadia
A
Publishing
bargain
price.
at twice the price. And it's probably available other places.
It's available all over the place.
On eBay.
Yeah,
Yes.
probably true. Everything's available.
And it's
on
certainly
eBay.
all of the national chains have it online and in person, and locally, you know, all those local shops do as well. So, and I appreciate that they do.
I appreciate the fact that you took this amount of time out of your busy day in life to sit here with us and to just tell us a little bit about what makes you tick. And I don't know who turns that crank on your back every morning to get you fired up, but I think that's innate. I think that was that fire in your belly, as they say, for history and preserving it came with you from the
think
very
so.
beginning. So tell me what the future's going to be in the next 30 seconds. What will you envision here?
Well, for the historian's office, the next big project is a curriculum project for the Civil War sesquicentennial.
I love it.
The 150th anniversary is coming up that's going to focus on life on the home front, and I'm hard at work on some lesson plans and materials that local teachers will be able to use to support studies of that anniversary.
That means we have to come back.
Excellent.
You can look forward to that and tell your friends about this program. Please do whatever you can to support Hometown Cable.
Yes.
And who knows where we're going to be next time.